At our Christmas party, my father introduced me as just the housekeeper to the CEO he was desperate to impress. My mother chimed in, "We only keep him out of pity. He's good with a mop." But they froze when the CEO stared at them and said, "Really, I know exactly who he is." The room fell silent as guests turned to watch the unfolding drama. I stood there holding a silver tray of champagne glasses, watching my parents' faces drain of color as Thomas Wellington's piercing blue eyes moved from them to me with unmistakable recognition. The champagne flute in my hand trembled slightly as Wellington stepped closer, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against our marble foyer. My father Harold's nervous laugh echoed through the sudden quiet that had descended over our Connecticut home's main living area. "Mr. Wellington, I think there's been some confusion." Harold stammered, his face flushing red beneath his thinning gray hair. "This is just our domestic help, Baxter. He's been with us for a few years now." My mother Sandra nodded vigorously, her pearl necklace catching the light from our crystal chandelier. "Yes, exactly. He's quite good at keeping the house tidy. We felt sorry for him after he dropped out of community college, so we gave him a job." Wellington's weathered face remained expressionless as he studied me with the intensity of a hawk examining its prey. Around us, the carefully selected group of 50 guests continued their conversations, but I could feel their attention shifting toward our small circle. The scent of pine from our 12-foot Christmas tree mixed with the aroma of my mother's catered appetizers. "Community college." Wellington repeated slowly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and million-dollar decisions. "That's interesting because I distinctly remember reading about a young man named Baxter Morrison, who graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School 3 years ago." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my father's Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard, his hand unconsciously adjusting his red silk tie. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Furthermore, Wellington continued his gaze, never leaving my face. That same Baxter Morrison was hired as the youngest senior analyst in Goldman Sachs' history. He was being fast-tracked for partner before he suddenly disappeared from Wall Street without explanation. Harold's laugh this time sounded more like a wheeze. "Sir, I think you have us confused with someone else. Our Baxter here never went to any fancy schools. He came back home after failing his courses and we took him in out of the goodness of our hearts." I set the champagne tray on a nearby antique oak side table and straightened my shoulders. For 3 years, I had listened to these lies, endured the humiliation, and played the role they had assigned me. But tonight was different. Tonight was the culmination of months of careful planning. "Actually, Mr. Wellington is correct," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly through the room. Several guests had now openly turned to listen, including Margaret Foster, our family's longtime real estate agent, who stood near the fireplace with her husband. Sandra's eyes widened in panic. "Baxter, what are you doing? Stop this nonsense right now!" But I continued meeting Wellington's approving nod with a steady gaze. "I did graduate from Harvard. I did work at Goldman Sachs. And I did disappear 3 years ago, when I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my family." Harold stepped forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You need to stop talking right now, son. You're embarrassing us in front of important people." The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years of being treated like hired help, of being invisible in my own family home, and now he was worried about embarrassment. What I discovered, I continued, my voice growing stronger, was that my parents had been stealing from me for years. The inheritance my grandmother left specifically for my education had mysteriously disappeared from the family trust. The money she saved her entire life to ensure I could attend the best schools was gone. Margaret Foster's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. The crash seemed to break whatever spell had held the room captive, and suddenly everyone was openly staring at our family drama. Wellington nodded slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to something resembling respect. "And that's when you decided to investigate." "That's when I decided to come home," I corrected. "To find out exactly what happened to my grandmother's money and to document everything I could find." Harold's face had gone from red to white. "Baxter, please. We can discuss this privately later." But there would be no stopping now. I had waited 3 years for this moment, 3 years of playing the role of the disappointing son, while secretly gathering evidence of their crimes. Sandra grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my shirt sleeve. "How dare you, after everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us, making up stories to strangers." I gently removed her hand from my arm and looked directly at Wellington. "Mr. Wellington, you mentioned you know exactly who I am. I'm curious what else you might know about my family's business dealings." The CEO's smile was thin but unmistakable. "More than you might expect, young man. Much more than you might expect." Wellington reached into his tailored charcoal suit jacket and withdrew a leather portfolio, the kind used for important business documents. The gesture sent a chill through the room that had nothing to do with the December wind rattling our windows. "What I know," Wellington began opening the portfolio with deliberate precision, "is that Baxter contacted my office 6 weeks ago through official channels. He requested a meeting to discuss irregularities in Morrison Construction's building permits and safety inspections." Harold's face went ashen. Around us, the party guests had abandoned all pretense of polite conversation. Mrs. Patterson, the mayor's wife, stepped closer with undisguised interest. Her husband, a city planning commissioner, looked suddenly uncomfortable. "That's impossible," Sandra protested, her voice rising an octave. "He's been here every day cleaning and cooking. When would he have time for such meetings?" I pulled out my own folder from behind the bar where I had hidden it earlier. The manila envelope contained 3 years of meticulous documentation, organized with the same attention to detail that had made me successful on Wall Street. "While you thought I was just mopping floors and washing dishes," I said, placing the folder on the coffee table, "I was actually conducting a comprehensive audit of our family's finances. What I found was systematic fraud spanning over a decade." Wellington examined the documents I spread across the polished surface. Bank statements, forged signatures, altered building permits, and insurance claims that didn't match reality. "The inheritance theft was just the beginning," I continued. "Harold's construction company has been cutting corners on building safety for years. Substandard materials bribed inspectors, falsified engineering reports. Margaret Foster, who had been unusually quiet since her champagne glass incident, suddenly spoke up. "Baxter, surely you're exaggerating. Your father builds beautiful homes." I turned to face her directly. "Actually, Margaret, you've been helping him hide the evidence. Those property transfers you handled last year, the ones where ownership was mysteriously shifted to shell companies right before building violations were discovered." Her face flushed crimson. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Shell companies owned by your husband's business partner." I continued consulting my notes. "Companies that exist only on paper to shield Harold from liability when his buildings develop structural problems." Wellington studied a particular document with intense interest. "These insurance claims are fascinating. Flood damage that occurred during a drought year. Fire damage that happened in buildings without electrical systems installed yet." Sandra lunged forward, trying to grab the papers. "Those are private family documents you have no right to steal from us." "Actually," I said, calmly preventing her from reaching the evidence, "these are public records that I obtained through legitimate channels. Building permits, insurance filings, tax documents, all completely legal to access." Harold finally found his voice, though it cracked with desperation. "Son, you don't understand the construction business. Sometimes corners have to be cut to stay competitive." Corners that resulted in the Riverside Elementary School addition collapsing during last spring's thunderstorm, I replied. "Fortunately, classes weren't in session, but 3 maintenance workers were injured." A collective gasp went up from the assembled guests. Patterson, the planning commissioner, stepped forward with obvious alarm. That collapse was ruled an act of God, he said. Unusual wind patterns, they said. Wellington looked up from the documents with a grim expression. According to these engineering reports that Baxter obtained, the support beams were undersized by 30%. The concrete mixture was diluted beyond building code standards. That wasn't wind damage. That was criminal negligence. My cousin Derek, who had been standing near the piano, suddenly looked pale. As Harold's accountant, he had unknowingly provided me with some of the most damaging evidence. Derek, I called to him gently. Remember those quarterly reports you've been filing, the ones where the materials costs never seem to match the actual purchases? Derek's hands shook as he set down his wine glass. Baxter, I just filed what Harold gave me. I trusted the receipts were accurate. They weren't, I said. Harold was billing clients for premium materials while actually purchasing cheaper alternatives. The difference went into offshore accounts that Sandra helped establish through her position at the municipal office. Sandra's composure finally cracked completely. We built this family from nothing. Your father worked 18-hour days to give you opportunities we never had. With stolen money and at the expense of people's safety, I replied. Mrs. Henderson's kitchen ceiling collapsed because of water damage from pipes Harold installed incorrectly. Mr. Garcia's basement flooded because the foundation wasn't properly waterproofed. Wellington closed his portfolio and stood up straighter, his commanding presence filling the room. What fascinates me most about this situation is the planning involved. Baxter, you didn't just stumble upon this evidence. I nodded. I've been documenting everything for 3 years. Every conversation, every document, every lie. I knew that eventually someone with the authority to act would need to see the complete picture. Harold made one final desperate attempt to control the situation. Mr. Wellington, surely we can discuss this privately. Perhaps we can work out some arrangement. The arrangement, Wellington interrupted, is that justice will be served. You see, I didn't come to this party for business. I came because a brilliant young man reached out to my company 6 weeks ago with evidence of a corruption network that threatens public safety. The room fell silent except for the soft Christmas music still playing from our sound system, an absurd contrast to the gravity of what was unfolding. What happens next? Wellington continued, We'll destroy everything you've built on lies and stolen money, but it will also restore integrity to a community that deserves better. Wellington reached for his cell phone with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions that changed lives. The soft glow of the screen illuminated his face as he scrolled through what appeared to be a lengthy message thread. Actually, Harold. Wellington said, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the room freeze. I need to clarify something about why I'm really here tonight. He turned his phone screen toward the assembled guests, displaying what looked like an official email with government letterheads. 6 months ago, my company was approached by the Federal Bureau of Investigation regarding building code violations and safety issues related to Morrison Construction. We've been conducting our own parallel investigation as part of a larger federal task force. The color drained completely from Harold's face. Sandra grabbed the back of a nearby chair for support, her knuckles white against the upholstered fabric. 3 separate building collapses with injuries. Wellington continued reading from his phone. The Riverside Elementary incident that Baxter mentioned was just the most recent. Before that, there was the Meadowbrook Retirement Center balcony collapse that hospitalized 4 elderly residents and the Jefferson Street apartment complex foundation failure that displaced 23 families. Margaret Foster started backing toward the door, but Wellington's sharp gaze caught her movement. Mrs. Foster, I wouldn't recommend leaving just yet. Your real estate transactions are a crucial part of this investigation, particularly those properties you sold knowing they had structural defects that were concealed from buyers. The Christmas party had transformed into something resembling a courtroom. Guests formed a semicircle around our family, their holiday cheer replaced by shocked fascination and growing outrage. City Councilman Robert Chen, who had been quietly nursing a bourbon near the window, suddenly started coughing violently. His face flushed as he realized all eyes had turned to him. Robert's involvement is particularly interesting. I said, consulting my documentation. As the councilman responsible for approving building permits, he's been taking monthly payments through his wife's consulting firm. Wellington nodded approvingly. The FBI has been tracking those payments for months. Bank transfers, shell company ownerships, falsified invoices for services never rendered. Robert set down his glass with a shaking hand. This is preposterous. I've served this community honestly for 8 years. You've been taking bribes for 8 years, I corrected, producing a bank statement from my folder. $5,000 per month paid through Chen & Associates Consulting for approving building permits that should never have been issued. Sandra finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a shriek. How dare you spy on your own family? We raised you, fed you, gave you a home. You stole from me, I replied calmly. You stole my inheritance, compromised public safety, and built your entire lifestyle on fraud. And when I came home trying to understand what happened, you treated me like a servant in my own house. Wellington pocketed his phone and addressed the room with the authority of someone delivering a verdict. What you're witnessing tonight is the culmination of a federal investigation that began when Baxter Morrison courageously contacted authorities about his family's criminal activities. Harold collapsed into a nearby armchair, his head in his hands. 30 years of building this business, and you destroy it all for what? Revenge, Joe? For justice, I corrected, and to prevent more people from being hurt by your greed. Derek, who had been standing frozen by the piano, suddenly spoke up with a trembling voice. I had no idea the numbers were falsified. Harold, you told me everything was legitimate business expenses. Derek's cooperation has been valuable, Wellington said. His accounting records provided crucial evidence of the money laundering operation. The scope of the conspiracy was becoming clear to everyone in the room. This wasn't just about one family's criminal activity. It was about systematic corruption that had put an entire community at risk. Margaret Foster made another attempt to leave, but Wellington's voice stopped her cold. Mrs. Foster, the FBI has been monitoring your movements for weeks. Those property transfers you handled last month, the ones where you helped Harold hide assets before anticipated legal action, they're all documented. She turned back toward us, her face pale and drawn. I was just doing my job. Harold said the transfers were for tax purposes. Tax evasion purposes. I clarified. Moving ownership of compromised properties to shell companies so Harold couldn't be held liable when the structural problems were discovered. Wellington checked his phone again, and his expression grew more serious. Actually, the timing tonight is quite fortuitous. I've been recording our entire conversation with the permission of federal authorities. He held up his phone, showing a recording app that had been running throughout our exchange. Every confession, every admission, every attempt to cover up criminal activity has been documented. This recording will be submitted as evidence in federal court. The room erupted in panicked murmurs as guests realized they had just witnessed a massive criminal confession. Some pulled out their own phones, either recording the scene or frantically texting what they had just learned. Sandra lunged toward Wellington's phone. You can't record us without permission. This is our private home. Actually, Wellington said easily, avoiding her reach. I announced my recording several times during our conversation, and more importantly, when crimes against public safety are involved, different rules apply. Harold looked up from his chair, his eyes red with defeated rage. You planned all this, didn't you? You orchestrated this entire evening. I met his gaze steadily. I spent 3 years gathering evidence while you treated me like garbage in my own home. Tonight isn't about revenge, it's about accountability. Wellington smiled grimly. And accountability is exactly what you're going to get. In fact, it's arriving sooner than you might expect. As if summoned by Wellington's words, the sound of car doors slamming echoed from our circular driveway. Through the frost-covered windows, we could see the distinctive red and blue lights of police vehicles, reflecting off the snow-covered evergreen trees that lined our property. That would be Police Chief Anderson, Wellington said, casually checking his gold Rolex. Right on schedule. Harold shot to his feet, panic replacing defeat in his bloodshot eyes. What do you mean on schedule? Before Wellington could answer, our mahogany front door opened without a knock. Police Chief Anderson entered, flanked by two plainclothes detectives and a woman in a dark business suit who carried herself with the unmistakable authority of a federal agent. Good evening, everyone. Chief Anderson said, his weathered face grave beneath his graying mustache. Sorry to interrupt your Christmas party, but we have some official business to conduct. The party guests pressed themselves against the walls, creating a path through the center of the room. The Christmas music still played softly, creating a surreal soundtrack to what was clearly about to become an arrest scene. Harold Morrison. The woman in the business suit announced, displaying her federal credentials. I'm Special Agent Jennifer Walsh, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, bribery, and reckless endangerment. The federal agent's words seemed to echo through the suddenly silent room. Sandra made a sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Sandra Morrison. Chief Anderson continued, stepping forward with handcuffs. You're also under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, and abuse of public office. As the reality of the situation hit her, Sandra's legs gave out. She would have collapsed if not for the quick reflexes of Detective Martinez, who caught her arm and guided her to a chair. This is impossible! Harold protested, his voice cracking with desperation. We've done nothing wrong. This is all lies and misunderstandings. Agent Walsh consulted a thick folder that looked remarkably similar to the documentation I had assembled. Mr. Morrison, we have bank records showing systematic fraud dating back 12 years. We have engineering reports proving you knowingly used substandard materials. We have recorded conversations where you discuss bribing city officials. Robert Chen, who had been trying to blend into the crowd near the fireplace, suddenly bolted toward the kitchen. Detective Rodriguez was faster intercepting him before he could reach the back door. Bai Botinom. Robert Chen. Rodriguez announced, producing his own set of handcuffs. You're under arrest for accepting bribes and conspiracy to endanger public safety. Margaret Foster watched Robert's arrest with growing horror, finally understanding that there would be no escape for any of them. Mrs. Foster White, Agent Walsh, called out, We'll need you to come with us as well. Your real estate license has been suspended pending investigation, and you're facing charges related to fraud and conspiracy. Wellington stepped beside me as we watched the arrests unfold. Baxter's evidence was the keystone that brought down the entire operation, he told the room. Without his courage to come forward, this corruption network could have continued for years. Derek approached us cautiously, his hands shaking. Agent Walsh, I cooperated fully with the investigation. My attorney said I would receive immunity for my testimony. Agent Walsh nodded. Your cooperation has been valuable, Mr. Patterson. You'll need to appear before the grand jury, but you won't be charged, provided you continue to assist with the prosecution. As handcuffs clicked into place around Harold's wrists, he turned to me with eyes full of bitter resentment. You've destroyed your own family for strangers. Your grandmother would be ashamed of what you've become. The mention of my grandmother hit like a physical blow, but I had prepared for this moment for 3 years. My grandmother taught me that integrity means doing the right thing even when it costs you everything, I replied. She would be proud that I chose justice over family loyalty built on lies. Sandra, now also in handcuffs, looked around the room at the faces of neighbors and friends who had witnessed her downfall. Please, someone help us. This is all a terrible mistake. But the expressions she met were not sympathetic. These were people whose community had been betrayed, whose safety had been compromised by the very family they had trusted. Mrs. Patterson, the mayor's wife, stepped forward. Sandra, my daughter, attends Riverside Elementary. She could have been in that building when it collapsed. The weight of their crimes was becoming real in a way that bank statements and legal documents couldn't convey. These weren't victimless financial crimes. They had put real people in actual danger. As the police prepared to escort Harold and Sandra toward the door, Agent Walsh turned to Wellington with professional respect. "Mr. Wellington, your company's cooperation with this investigation has been exemplary. The Joint Task Force approach allowed us to build a comprehensive case." Wellington nodded toward me. "The credit belongs to Baxter. He provided the initial evidence and maintained contact with authorities throughout the investigation. His commitment to justice made this possible." Harold stopped in the doorway, held by Officer Chen's firm grip on his arm. "Son, please, don't let them do this to us. We're still family." I looked at the man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bicycle and helped with homework, but who had also stolen my inheritance and endangered innocent people for profit. "Family doesn't steal from each other," I said quietly. "Family doesn't lie to each other for years, and family doesn't put strangers in danger for money." As the police cars pulled away with their prisoners, the remaining party guests stood in stunned silence in our expensively decorated living room. The Christmas tree lights still twinkled merrily, but the celebration was definitively over. Wellington placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Baxter. It took tremendous courage. But courage wasn't what I felt as I watched my parents disappear into the night. What I felt was the complex mixture of relief, sadness, and hope that comes when a long and painful chapter finally ends. In the sudden quiet that followed the arrests, the remaining party guests seemed unsure whether to leave or stay. The grandfather clock in our hallway chimed 10 o'clock, its familiar sound, now marking the end of everything I had known as normal family life. Agent Walsh remained behind, organizing evidence bags and coordinating with the local police. She approached me with professional courtesy, but unmistakable respect in her eyes. "Mr. Morrison, there are additional aspects of this case that you should be aware of," she said, consulting her notes. "The civil asset forfeiture proceedings began this morning." Wellington raised an eyebrow with interest. "Asset forfeiture? Your parents attempted to hide substantial assets through offshore accounts and shell companies," Agent Walsh explained. "However, Baxter's documentation allowed us to trace every transaction. We've frozen all accounts connected to the criminal enterprise." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a legal document that I had been carrying for weeks, waiting for this moment. "Actually, Agent Walsh, there's something else you should know," I said, unfolding the papers. 6 months ago, I filed a separate civil lawsuit to recover my stolen inheritance. The court awarded judgment in my favor last month. The remaining guests, including Derek and several neighbors, gathered closer to hear this new development. The judgment covered not just the original inheritance amount, but also interest and damages, I continued. It totaled $247,000. Margaret Foster, who was still waiting to be processed by Detective Rodriguez, let out a small gasp. "Where would you get that kind of money? The lawsuit costs alone." The lawsuit was filed pro bono by a legal aid organization that specializes in inheritance fraud, I explained. They took the case because the evidence was so comprehensive. Wellington smiled with what looked like paternal pride. "And what did you do with the recovered funds?" I looked around the room at faces that had known my family for decades, people who had trusted Harold's construction work and Sandra's municipal oversight. "I used a portion of it to purchase this house," I said. "Harold had mortgaged it 3 times to cover his business debts. The bank was preparing foreclosure proceedings." The implications hit Derek immediately. "You bought your parents' house? You own this place now?" "As of last Tuesday." I confirmed. "The deed is in my name. Harold and Sandra have been living in my house for the past week without knowing it." Agent Walsh checked this information against her files. "The timing aligns with our asset seizure proceedings. Any attempt by your parents to sell or transfer property would have been blocked by federal order." Mrs. Patterson approached me with obvious curiosity. "Baxter, what will you do with such a large house?" Before I could answer, Wellington interjected with news that surprised even me. "Actually, that's something I wanted to discuss with you tonight, Baxter," he said. "My company has been so impressed with your investigative work and ethical standards that we'd like to offer you a position." The room fell silent again as everyone waited for details. "We're creating a new division focused on ethics and compliance," Wellington continued. "Given your financial background and demonstrated integrity, we'd like you to head the department." My mind reeled at the unexpected offer. "Mr. Wellington, I appreciate the consideration, but the starting salary would be $120,000 annually, plus benefits and performance bonuses," he continued. "The position would involve investigating potential fraud in construction and real estate development across New England." Derek whistled softly. "That's more than twice what Harold made in his best years." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. In one night, I had gone from being treated as domestic help to being offered an executive position that paid more than my father had ever earned through his criminal enterprise. Agent Walsh sealed another evidence bag and addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, this investigation will likely result in indictments for several other individuals who aren't present tonight. If any of you have information about corrupt building practices or bribery in municipal government, we encourage you to come forward." The federal agent's words sent a visible shudder through the remaining guests. Clearly, the corruption network extended beyond just my immediate family. Mrs. Patterson raised her hand tentatively. "Agent Walsh, my husband works for the City Planning Commission. If he had unknowing involvement, what should he do?" "Voluntary cooperation is always viewed favorably," Agent Walsh replied. "We're interested in prosecuting the criminals, not punishing the victims." I walked to my grandmother's portrait, which hung above the mantelpiece near our Christmas tree. Her kind eyes seemed to look down approvingly at the evening's events. "There's one more thing I want everyone to know," I said, turning back to face the group. "The recovered inheritance money that I don't need for the house and legal expenses will be donated to establish a scholarship fund." Wellington nodded encouragingly. "What kind of scholarship?" "For foster children who want to attend college," I replied. "Kids who don't have family support or financial resources. My grandmother always said education was the key to breaking cycles of poverty and abuse." The emotional weight of the moment seemed to hit everyone simultaneously. Here was a young man who had been betrayed by his own family, yet his response was to help other vulnerable people, rather than seek personal revenge. Derek approached me hesitantly. "Baxter, I know I was part of this mess even if I didn't understand what was happening. Is there any way I can help make things right?" I considered his question carefully. Derek had been manipulated just as much as I had been, though in different ways. "Actually, yes," I said. "The scholarship fund will need honest financial management. If you're willing to volunteer your accounting services, we could ensure every dollar reaches the students who need it." Derek's relief was visible. "Absolutely, I'll do whatever it takes to help." Agent Walsh finished organizing her evidence and prepared to leave. "Mr. Morrison, you'll need to testify before the grand jury, but the prosecution expects this to be a straightforward case, given the evidence quality." As the federal agent departed, Wellington and I were left with a small group of neighbors who seemed reluctant to end this extraordinary evening. "There's something poetic about this," Mrs. Patterson observed. "Harold tried to impress you, Mr. Wellington, by diminishing his own son. Instead, he destroyed his own life and elevated Baxter to a position he never could have imagined." Wellington chuckled grimly. "Pride goes before a fall, as they say. Harold's arrogance tonight accelerated his own downfall. As the last of the police cars disappeared down our tree-lined street, their red and blue lights fading into the snowy December darkness, I heard the sound of another vehicle approaching. This one was different, a black sedan moving slowly, purposefully, as if the driver was searching for the right address. Through our frost-covered windows, I watched as the car pulled into our circular driveway and parked beneath the ornate street lamp that Harold had installed to show off our family's prosperity. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out into the cold night air. Even from a distance, even after 4 years of separation, I recognized her immediately. My heart stopped as Jennifer Morrison, my sister, the daughter Harold and Sandra had disowned and forbidden me from contacting, walked toward our front door. Wellington noticed my sudden stillness. "Baxter, what is it?" Before I could answer, the doorbell rang with the same cheerful Christmas melody it had played throughout the evening. But now the sound seemed to announce something far more significant than late-arriving party guests. I opened the door to find Jennifer standing on our threshold, her dark hair dusted with snowflakes, and her professional gray coat indicating she had come directly from work. At 31, she had developed the confident bearing of someone accustomed to courtrooms and legal battles. "Hello, Baxter," she said simply, her voice carrying both warmth and the weight of years of forced separation. The remaining party guests, Wellington, Derek, Mrs. Patterson, and a few neighbors, watched in fascination as I embraced my sister for the first time since she had been banished from the family. "Jennifer," I whispered, emotion threatening to overwhelm my carefully maintained composure. "How did you know to come tonight?" She stepped into the warmth of our foyer, removing her coat to reveal the dark business suit of a federal prosecutor. "Because I've been working on this case for 8 months. Wellington's eyes widened with recognition. "Your assistant U.S. Attorney, Jennifer Morrison. I've heard about your work on public corruption cases." Jennifer nodded, her professional demeanor softening as she looked around the home where we had grown up. When the FBI began investigating Harold's construction company, they discovered that one of his victims, a family displaced by building collapse, had contacted my office months earlier. Derek looked confused. "But your last name is Morrison. How did the authorities not realize you were related?" "I kept my maiden name professionally," Jennifer explained, "and I immediately recused myself from direct involvement once I understood the family connection. But I was able to provide guidance to the investigating team." Mrs. Patterson stepped forward with obvious curiosity. "My dear, where have you been all these years? Your parents told everyone you moved away for work." Jennifer's expression hardened. "My parents told everyone I moved away because they couldn't tolerate having a daughter who questioned their ethics. 4 years ago, I discovered they were using their political connections to cover up Harold's building code violations. I remembered that confrontation, though I hadn't understood its full significance at the time. Jennifer had been fresh out of law school, idealistic, and determined to report what she had discovered. Harold and Sandra's response had been swift and brutal. "They gave me a choice," Jennifer continued. "Keep quiet about what I knew or leave and never contact the family again. When I chose to report the violations to authorities, they disowned me completely." Wellington shook his head in disgust. "They destroyed their relationship with both children to protect their criminal enterprise. What they didn't know," Jennifer said, her voice gaining strength, "was that I never stopped investigating. I built my entire career around prosecuting the kind of corruption they represented." She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a folder that looked remarkably similar to the evidence I had assembled. "For 4 years, I've been documenting their crimes from a distance. When Baxter contacted the FBI 6 months ago, the agents called me immediately. That's when I learned my little brother had been conducting his own investigation." The realization that Jennifer and I had been working toward the same goal, separated by our parents' manipulation, but united in our commitment to justice, brought tears to my eyes. "We coordinated everything," Jennifer continued. "Baxter provided the inside evidence while I ensured the federal case would be airtight." Derek looked between us with amazement. "So you both knew this was going to happen tonight?" "We planned it," I confirmed. Jennifer suggested using Wellington's presence to force a public confession. We knew Harold would try to impress him and reveal his desperation. Wellington laughed with genuine admiration. "You used me as bait in your own trap." "We used Harold's own arrogance against him," Jennifer corrected. "He destroyed himself by trying to diminish Baxter in front of someone he thought could save his failing business." Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. "To think that Sandra told everyone you had abandoned the family. She made it sound like you were ungrateful and selfish. The truth," Jennifer said, "is that they couldn't tolerate having children with consciences. They needed us to be complicit in their crimes, and when we refused, they tried to eliminate us from their lives." I looked at my sister with profound respect and gratitude. Jennifer, you sacrificed your relationship with the family to protect innocent people. I just followed your example. You did more than follow my example, she replied. You spent 3 years gathering evidence while enduring their psychological abuse. That took more courage than anything I've done. Wellington observed our reunion with obvious emotion. This is remarkable. 2 siblings separated by their parents' criminality working independently to bring them to justice. Jennifer nodded. Actually, Mr. Wellington, I should mention that I've accepted a position as general counsel for your company. Baxter and I will be working together to ensure this kind of corruption doesn't happen again in your construction projects. The news surprised everyone, including me. Wellington grinned broadly. I offered Jennifer the position this afternoon after Agent Walsh briefed me on her role in the investigation. Having both Morrison children on my team seemed like poetic justice. Derek raised his wine glass in a toast. To the Morrison siblings, proof that integrity can run in families even when it skips a generation. As we clinked glasses in the same room where Harold and Sandra had been arrested hours earlier, I felt a profound sense of completion. The family that had rejected us for our principles had been replaced by a family of choice based on shared values. There's one more thing, Jennifer said, producing a legal document from her briefcase. Harold and Sandra wrote to me from jail tonight. They want to see us. I studied the letter written in my father's familiar handwriting but lacking his usual authoritative tone. Instead, it sounded desperate and pleading. What do you think? I asked Jennifer. She considered the question carefully. I think they're finally beginning to understand the consequences of their choices. Whether they're genuinely remorseful or just scared remains to be seen. Wellington excused himself to make some phone calls, leaving Jennifer and me alone for the first time in 4 years. We sat together on the couch where I had endured countless lectures about my failures and ingratitude. I missed you so much, I admitted. There were times when I wondered if I was going crazy, if maybe they were right about everything. Jennifer took my hand. You weren't crazy. You were the only sane person in an insane situation. What you accomplished took incredible strength. As we talked through the events of the past few years, sharing perspectives and filling in gaps in each other's understanding, I realized that losing my parents' approval had been the price of gaining something far more valuable: the respect of my sister and my own self-respect. Tomorrow, Jennifer said, we start building something better, together. 6 months after that life-changing Christmas party, I stood in the federal courthouse watching Judge Patricia Martinez deliver sentences that would reshape our community for years to come. Harold received 8 years in federal prison for conspiracy fraud and reckless endangerment. Sandra got 6 years for money laundering and abuse of public office. Robert Chen was sentenced to 4 years for accepting bribes and endangering public safety. The courtroom was packed with community members who had been affected by their crimes. Mrs. Henderson, whose kitchen ceiling had collapsed, testified about living in fear that her house was unsafe. Mr. Garcia spoke about the financial burden of repairing flood damage caused by Harold's substandard work. The parents of Riverside Elementary students described their horror at learning their children could have been killed by a preventable building collapse. Jennifer, now serving as Wellington Industries' general counsel, had worked with federal prosecutors to ensure justice was served while protecting the community from future corruption. Her transformation from disowned daughter to respected legal advocate inspired everyone who knew our story. Margaret Foster received 3 years probation and permanent loss of her real estate license after cooperating fully with investigators. Derek's testimony proved crucial to the prosecution, and his honest accounting work now helps oversee the scholarship fund we established with my recovered inheritance money. That scholarship fund has grown beyond anything I imagined possible. Wellington Industries matches every donation dollar for dollar, and we've already provided full college funding for 12 foster children who might otherwise never have had such opportunities. Each recipient receives not just financial support, but mentoring and internship opportunities designed to break cycles of poverty and neglect. My position as Director of Ethics and Compliance for Wellington Industries has allowed me to implement industry-leading standards that prioritize safety and integrity over profits. We've developed inspection protocols that have been adopted as models throughout New England. Other construction companies now compete to meet our standards rather than cutting corners to underbid us. The house where I grew up has been transformed into a transitional housing facility for young adults aging out of foster care. Jennifer and I renovated it together, turning each bedroom into a small apartment where young people can live affordably while attending college or trade school. Our grandmother's portrait hangs in the main living area, watching over the young people we help in her memory. 3 months ago, Harold and Sandra wrote to us from prison. Their letters showed genuine remorse and understanding of how their choices had hurt not just their own family, but an entire community. They asked for our forgiveness, not for release from consequences, but for the chance to rebuild some kind of relationship based on honesty. Jennifer and I decided to visit them. It was painful to see our parents in orange jumpsuits confined to a sterile visiting room under the watchful eyes of corrections officers. But for the first time in our lives, they spoke to us with complete honesty about their mistakes and the fear that had driven them to make increasingly desperate choices. Harold admitted that his pride had prevented him from asking for help when his business began failing. Instead of seeking legitimate solutions, he had chosen to cut corners and hide problems until the deception became a way of life. Sandra acknowledged that her loyalty to Harold had blinded her to the moral implications of their actions. "We taught you that family loyalty meant protecting each other from consequences," Harold said during our visit. "But real family loyalty means holding each other accountable for doing what's right." Their apologies couldn't undo the damage they had caused, but they represented a genuine recognition of their failures. Jennifer and I agreed to maintain contact with them, not to excuse their crimes, but to model the kind of family relationship we wished we had always had. Wellington has become the father figure that Harold never managed to be. He challenges me intellectually, supports my professional growth, and demonstrates through his own actions what ethical leadership looks like. His mentorship has taught me that success built on integrity is not just more satisfying, but more sustainable than success built on deception. The community trust that was shattered by my parents' corruption has slowly been rebuilt through transparent governance reforms and rigorous oversight of public construction projects. The new city council requires multiple inspections by independent contractors, and all building permits must be approved by a committee rather than a single official. Derek now serves as the city's independent financial auditor, a position created specifically to prevent the kind of manipulation that had hidden years of corruption. His honest work has restored confidence in municipal financial management and serves as a model for other communities. Mrs. Patterson, whose husband's planning commission work had been compromised by the corruption network, became a vocal advocate for government transparency. She now chairs a citizen oversight committee that reviews all major development projects and ensures community input is heard and respected. The scholarship recipients we support have begun graduating from college and trade schools, many of them choosing careers in public service education and construction safety. They understand that their opportunities came from someone else's courage to stand up for what's right, and they're committed to paying that gift forward. Last month, the first recipient graduated from engineering school and joined Wellington Industries as a junior structural engineer. Watching Maria Rodriguez walk across the graduation stage, knowing that her education was funded by money recovered from my parents' crimes, illustrated the profound truth that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about restoration and renewal. Jennifer recently announced her engagement to a fellow prosecutor she met while working on public corruption cases. Their shared commitment to justice and their understanding of how family dysfunction can be overcome through integrity makes them perfect partners. I couldn't be happier for my sister, who deserves every bit of love and happiness life can offer. My own life has found meaning and purpose that I never could have imagined during those dark years of being treated as a servant in my own home. The respect I've earned through honest work, the relationships I've built with people who share my values, and the knowledge that my actions have made the community safer, all provide satisfaction that no amount of stolen money could have purchased. Wellington recently offered me a partnership track in the company, with the goal of eventually taking over operations when he retires. The opportunity represents not just professional advancement, but the chance to shape an entire industry's approach to ethical construction practices. The Christmas party where everything changed is now remembered by our community, not as a social gathering, but as the night when truth finally overcame years of deception. People still talk about the courage it took to expose my own family's crimes, but I've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to do what's right despite the fear. I learned that family isn't defined by blood relations, but by the people who treat you with respect and support your growth. Sometimes the greatest act of love is holding people accountable for their actions, even when it's painful. True strength comes not from seeking revenge, but from building a better future for yourself and others. My grandmother always said that character is what you do when no one is watching. But I discovered that sometimes, when everything is watching, that's when your character matters most. The courage to stand up for what's right, even when it costs everything familiar, is the foundation of a life worth living. The money my parents stole was meant to give me opportunities for success. By stealing it, they thought they were taking away my future. But by forcing me to find my own way to develop my own principles and to choose integrity over family loyalty, they inadvertently gave me something far more valuable than any inheritance could have provided. They gave me the opportunity to discover who I really am when everything I thought I knew about family and loyalty was stripped away. They gave me the chance to build a life based on my own values rather than their expectations. Most importantly, they gave me the experience of learning that doing the right thing, even when it's incredibly difficult, brings a kind of peace and satisfaction that can't be purchased or stolen. Today, as I prepare for another day of work that protects public safety and promotes ethical business practices, I carry my grandmother's wisdom with me. Character isn't something you inherit. It's something you choose every day in every decision, regardless of how others around you choose to live. The Christmas party that destroyed my family's criminal empire became the foundation for a life built on truth, integrity, and service to others. Sometimes destruction is necessary before renewal can begin. Sometimes you have to lose the family you were born into in order to find the family you were meant to have. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people you care about is refuse to enable their destructive choices, even when that refusal costs you everything you thought you wanted. Have you ever faced a situation where doing the right thing required sacrificing relationships with people you loved? How did you find the courage to choose integrity over loyalty? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help others find it. Subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people finding the strength to do extraordinary things in the face of difficult choices. And please share this with someone who might need to hear that choosing integrity, even when it's painful, is always the right decision. Thank you for listening to my story and for believing that truth and justice matter more than comfort and convenience. Remember that your character is defined not by what happens to you, but by how you choose to respond when life tests your principles. Choose courage. Choose integrity. Choose hope.